On today's show, inside the infrastructure deal and the impact on our roads and bridges and broadband and more. We'll zero in on what's the biggest investment in generations will mean for Western New York.
Plus, turning calls into cash. See how a woman managed to turn the tables on those robocallers and make a lot of money in the process.
And honoring Black veterans. We talk with the group behind a first-of-its-kind monument coming to the Buffalo waterfront.
We're glad you're here with us on this Veterans Day. First up for us, ever since the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill finally made it through Congress last week, we've heard a very common question here and all over the country. What does it mean for me and my community?
Well, here in Western New York, we're starting to get some answers to that question. Senator Chuck Schumer gave us a look at what it means for all of New York State this week. The state will get $13.5 billion to fix roads and bridges. We'll also compete for a share of $12.5 billion for nationwide bridge repairs, $1 billion to remove highways that were built through neighborhoods, and $7.5 billion for high-profile transportation projects that used to be known as the Tiger Grants.
So that's kind of the big picture. For some specifics, you can look to Jerry Zremski's front page lead article in today's Buffalo News. It is titled, "Infrastructure Bill Likely to Make Impact Locally Starting in Spring."
And Jerry joins us live tonight to talk about it. He's the Washington, D.C. bureau chief for the paper, and he joins us live from Maryland, where he teaches a journalism class this evening as well. So, Jerry, we appreciate you spending some time to educate us as well tonight.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Great to see you as always. So we talked about some of the big picture there, but when we're specifically looking at road and bridge repairs in Western New York, what kind of projects do we think are going to be on that list?
Well, I think there are going to be all sorts of projects on this list, and I'm going to actually update my story a little bit. I had a really interesting phone call today with a group of engineers and highway officials from across Western New York about what they see, about what's coming. And what they see is that probably some of the first projects that we're going to see are those that are on city-owned or town or county roads rather than state or federal roads. And the reason for that is that local governments can move a little bit faster. So you might see some repair work on streets that need it in Buffalo, for example. But also there are a lot of projects that are pretty much on the drawing board, already drawn up, that, according to Congressman Brian Higgins, could be done relatively quickly, or at least could be started relatively quickly, probably finished within a year or two. And I mentioned several of those stories, those projects in my story today. And what I want to do here is just shift to my story for a second. I'll just mention a couple of them, if I can. So, for example, improvements to Tift Street. Is one of the projects that the congressman mentioned to me. A new bridge replacement at Louisiana Street, along with highway improvements there. The full return of cars to Main Street, the Riverline project, and the full reconstruction of Niagara Street. Those are just some of the many projects that could really be coming down the line here in the next couple of years.
And we certainly think of things like roads and bridges, first when we think of things like this, it's a big chunk of it. But based on what you wrote, it also looks like families will be getting help right with their homes as well for things like heating bills, but also for things like removing lead pipes, which can be a very big issue.
Yeah, there are very many provisions of this bill. It's one of the most complicated pieces of legislation that I've seen in terms of its scope and what it's trying to do. And when I think about what matters most for Buffalo, I think of a couple of things beyond roads and bridges. One is the huge increase in funding for the federal weatherization program. What this is going to mean is that literally thousands of families in Western New York are going to qualify for help from the federal government to get insulation, to get a new heating system, to improve their home to the point where it will use less energy and it will cost them less to heat it in the wintertime. And that's obviously just huge to anyone who can participate in that program. And the funding for that has gone up nearly 11-fold. So you can tell exactly that it's just going to be a much, much bigger program in the coming year or two. And then secondly, on the lead pipes, that's hugely important too. The city has more than 150 miles of lead water service line pipes. And there is always that concern that the insulation in them will wear out, will not work, and that there could be contamination that we get into the drinking water. This bill is intended to try to replace as many of those pipes all around the country as it can. One of the big questions I'm going to be following is how far will the $15 billion in this bill for this purpose really go? President Biden wanted $45 billion, and there were experts in the field who said that it would actually cost even more than that to replace all the lead pipes in America. So we're just going to have to see how this works out, how much Buffalo gets, how much Niagara Falls gets, because there are lead pipes there as well. And it's going to be one of the most important elements of the bill, even if all of the lead pipes are not removed, but if a significant number of them are.
Yeah, such a huge impact. Also, Jerry, we've talked a lot about the lack of access to reliable broadband internet in big parts of Western New York, especially our rural areas. I know there's a big investment in broadband in this bill as well.
Yes, there is. And this should fulfill a promise that politicians have been making for 20 years, which is to actually bring good, reliable, fast internet service to rural America. This will take some time, of course, because it's a big, comprehensive project. Now, there are projects going on already. Erie County has one, Wyoming County, or not Wyoming, but Orleans County has one. So those counties might have a little bit of a head start in all of this. But one would hope, and the experts I've talked to and from what I've read, the indication seems to be there is enough money in this bill to really do that, to really make sure that all of America is fully wired for high-speed internet.
And these are all things that could start in the near future. But if we're looking ahead, what kind of long-term impacts could we see here as well? Especially you're talking about something that is very large, very complicated, and also having those conversations about how far is some of this money going to go with these projects?
That's a great question, and we're not going to know the real answer to that for several years, but there are some insights that I think are kind of important. One, that program that exists in the bill for transformative highway projects to remove highways from neighborhoods that were essentially destroyed by them, that program has shrunk dramatically. It was supposed to be $25 billion in the original version of the president's bill. It's now only $1 billion. That doesn't really go very far. So I would think that we have to be very careful about getting our hopes up for any kind of huge transformative project like that. We just don't know if Buffalo would be suggested for it, and it would be hugely competitive because these highways have been built in cities all across the country through urban neighborhoods that ended up never being the same. So time will tell, but there's not a lot of money in there for that kind of project.
Yeah, it's such a good point. We know that this bill started out a lot bigger, but you have to get the votes to pass it. It was a bipartisan bill, we should point out, with support, especially bipartisan support in the Senate when it passed months ago, but also I think 13 Republicans and all the Democrats, or except 6, voting for it in the House as well. Jerry Zremski is Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Buffalo News. Jerry, thanks for your reporting and for your time tonight. Very invaluable.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Class dismissed.